Hi, my name is Bob Flores, and I'm here to talk to you about fortifying against nation-state cyber threats, or being able to thwart these cyber threats. The first thing I want to tell you is that this is not a bunch of stuff I made up. It's a collaborative effort between myself and several colleagues of mine, as well as the experience I had in the national security community. And so, if those of you who don't know me, this is a little bit about me and why you might want to listen. And, I'm happy to field questions at any point in the future. So let's talk about nation state threats. We're going to talk about the ever evolving threat of nation state cyber attacks, examine motivations, capabilities, and the tactics that are employed by these people. And we'll explore the challenges of defending against these things, because after all, that's why we're here, right? So nation state cyber actors, these are a little bit different than other cyber actors that you may be familiar with. So generally speaking, they are nation state sponsored, so they're well funded and they're highly skilled. They are APT groups, advanced persistent threat groups, that engage in long-term campaigns, usually very stealthy, often targeting specific organizations or even individuals. And I know you've seen in the newspaper several examples of this, and we'll get into some of that later. Espionage and intelligence gathering. This is what nation states do. They steal sensitive data, whether it be intellectual property, military secrets, whatever. They also want to sow disinformation and propaganda. And so some of the nation states use their attacks to be able to do this. Some common penetration techniques, all of which require a human being, at least today. Crafted emails. I mean, we all know about phishing attacks. And actually, that's how most of these attacks start. Not all, but most of them do start from an email, a deceptive email. An email will have deceptive content. And, some of these things are getting to be very, very clever. And frankly, I don't know that there's anybody in the world today who could not be fooled by some of these things, including me. They typically have malicious links in them that are disguised to look like, your traditional links to things. And when you hit the link, it installs malware on your machine. And obviously, when they put the malware on there, what they're trying to do is gain access to the computer system that your computer is hooked into, with the intent of either sowing havoc inside the network or extracting information. Exploiting vulnerabilities. There are known vulnerabilities that nation-state actors actively pursue and target. They leverage these comprehensive vulnerability databases that are, by the way, these are not big secret things. I mean, pretty much anybody can find these databases and find the information in them. What they're very good at is using automated tools to scan through these things rather than having to wade through them on a personal basis. The nation-state actors are experts at exploiting zero-day issues. And a zero-day issue is one that nobody so far knows about. And these 0 days, unfortunately, get discovered by some people, and then they, depending on whether they're good guys or bad guys, they might report them to the vendor or say, let's just keep this one to ourselves. So, living off the land techniques. They leverage built-in system utilities and admin tools to conduct malicious activities. And because they're using well-known tools, then it doesn't raise suspicions. They execute malicious code directly in memory, unless you've protected against this, and we'll discuss this a little bit later on. They do credential harvesting. One of the things about these email attacks is that they're looking to grab user IDs and passwords, because they can then use that later on to be able to gain access to the network. And then they insert malicious code into legitimate running processes to hide malicious activities. Those of you that are in the security business know about all this stuff already. The difference here is that the nation-state actors are just total experts at it. They use long-term persistent strategies as well. We have seen nation-state actors inside of our power grids, for example, for years, and they're not doing any harm, but they're there. And the speculation is that they're there just to, launch an attack sometime in the future. So extended dwell time, they get in there, they spend their time, they can do network mapping, make extensive maps of the network so that they know exactly where they need to go, whatever they want to launch an attack. And the credential caching, I mentioned that they're trying to steal credentials, and so a lot of times they'll cache these things right on the network. And they're continuously evolving techniques to improve their defense measures against counterattacks that, folks like us deploy. And these tactics, by the way, are very, very difficult to detect. A lot of these nation states target critical infrastructure. I mentioned that we know we've seen the Chinese in our power grids, and so that's one of the things they go after. The oil and gas infrastructure. We all know about the pipeline disasters that have happened in the past. Transportation systems, they're into water treatment facilities. We've had over the past 15 years or so evidence of nation-state actors inside of some of our water treatment facilities, and of course the financial networks. And the feeling there that if you want to disturb the financial network, that can cause all kinds of chaos. So some recent nation-state attacks are the SolarWinds attack, which, pretty much everybody here has heard about, widely attributed to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. We do have to be somewhat careful about how we attribute these things because one nation-state can mimic another nation-state. So it's, especially when, our government comes out, everybody wants to know, well, who did this? If you reach far back to the Sony attack that the North Koreans are basically attributed to launching, we were very, very careful about attributing that to North Korea because we knew that the signatures inside that thing could be duplicated by somebody else. In 2023, we had the supply chain attack, 3CX phone system. This one was linked to North Korea, again, through the various signatures that we saw in the malware. The Microsoft Exchange server breach, I think everybody's heard about this. This affected a tremendous number of people and generally attributed to China. Some others were the Colonial Pipeline attack in 2021. This was the largest attack on U.S. energy infrastructure so far. We had to shut down the pipeline. And again, this is attributed to Russian-backed actors, not necessarily the government itself. Iranian cyber operations, the Iranian hacker groups, they breached multiple American organizations, including a small municipal water authority in Pennsylvania. Salt Typhoon sort of first came to light in 2024. It is still making news today. So these are Chinese state-sponsored hackers. They conduct extensive cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure in the U.S. Military bases, communications networks, which is the one we saw in late 2024, but also power grids. And then the Russian cyber attacks on Ukraine and NATO. These are very well publicized. You also have the Ukraine power grid attacks that happened in 2015, and then late again in 2022. And then very, very recently, I think everybody's heard about what happened with the U.S. Treasury being breached. This is attributed to China. And it, again, like kind of the SolarWinds attack, it came through a third party, in this case Beyond Trust, where there's a vulnerability in that system that they exploited. Okay, so these guys are sophisticated. They have unlimited resources, being people and dollars. And so is there anything you can do? And what we're going to talk about are some of the things that can be done to thwart these attacks. And I will tell you that some of these things are not for everybody. Some of these things might be considered to be disruptive in your own organization. And so you have to weigh these things very carefully. But with that, let's go. First of all, I would say that it's important that you utilize some security framework. It doesn't matter which one you use. A lot of people tout NIST, which is fine. Nothing wrong with NIST. But European community sometimes uses NIST, but they also often use ISO 27001. And there's a lot of overlap in these security frameworks. And the important thing about using the framework is it's just a guideline for you, and it helps you miss fewer things. The CIS controls is another prioritized set of cybersecurity best practices for organizations. Here's an example of the CIS controls. I'm not going to go through all of these. Most of you already know them. Implement zero trust. We've heard a lot about zero trust lately, and it is not just a buzzword, but one of the things that's important to understand is that it is also not a product. It is a mindset. It's a culture. And so there you have to utilize different tools to be able to affect this culture, if you will. But it basically means that you don't trust anything, that you're always verifying. Security cultures inside your organization. Do your people care about security? We talked about most of the attacks that come in through phishing. That's a people-oriented thing. People are the ones viewing the email. So it's important that you educate your people about these techniques and even play games with them and give them, training programs and phishing simulations and things like this so that they really know what to look for. Security policies are very, very important. I can't tell you the number of organizations I've been into to do a security assessment on, and there were no security policies. And so, okay, does that mean people can't be secure? Well, no, it doesn't. But it also means if somebody does something wrong, they don't know it's wrong because there's no policy against it. So it's important that you have security policies in place. The other thing that I see a big lack of is a reporting mechanism among the people in some of these organizations. And so it's very, very important. You can run around and you say, well, if you see something, say something. Okay, but they need to know who to say it to. And some people forget about that. Continuous monitoring. This is one of those areas where this is not for everybody. But if you're going to be serious about looking at these kinds of threats, then this is pretty important stuff. And so, as part of a formal insider threat program, you should consider using behavior analytics to look at your employees. What happens when you see Bob's printer printing, 3,000 pages at 2 o'clock in the morning, and Bob is never there at 2 o'clock in the morning. So these things can be very, very important. Encrypt all data at rest and in transit. And consider using confidential computing, and we'll talk about confidential computing in a little bit more. The feeling here is that, okay, if they steal my data but it's encrypted, then it's of no use to them. And that's probably true, assuming you have good key management and they didn't scale the keys along with the data. Access control auditing. You need to regularly audit access permissions and identify unauthorized or unnecessary access. Don't give everybody the keys to the kingdom. Give people access only what they need. You need to track changes to your critical systems and your infrastructure to identify potential tampering as well. Identity and access management. This is the underpinning of zero trust, frankly. And the idea is to be able to identify and verify the identity of everything on the network, people and things, not just the humans. Multi-factor authentication for authentication techniques goes a long way to thwarting these attacks as well. If I steal your user ID and password, but you have MFA enabled somewhere, chances are that user ID and password are not going to be much use to me. I mentioned this before, the least privilege principle, grant people only access to what they need to do their job. And you got to do reviews and audit. You got to be able to look at this stuff. Sensitive corporate databases. No token-based access is permitted with these things. People need to be logging into the database directly with whatever system you're using, preferably one that has MFA enabled. It's just the data in these things is just too important. Now, you might argue, well, my organization doesn't really have sensitive data. That might be true, and it might not be true. But I think this is something worth taking a look at. Confidential computing, we talked about before. Basically, what happens with confidential computing is that a secure enclave is created, and then all data that is deemed to be sensitive is processed only in that secure enclave. Asset inventory, very, very important. You cannot protect what you don't know you have. And so it's important that you maintain a real-time inventory of all IT assets. I mentioned CPO here. I have no ties to this company, and you'll see some other companies in bold as we go through this. These are just companies that do these things, and I happen to know that they work. That yes, they have competitors, so feel free to shop around. Risk assessment. You have to continuously evaluate the security status of each asset on your network. And you have to extend that asset management from your network into the cloud, assuming you're using cloud services, and I suspect most of you are. Automated patching. This is something that, I talked to CISOs about this and they say, well, we can't do that. And I would agree that you probably can't do that with everything on your network, but you certainly should be able to do it for the user-facing devices, like the PCs. You have to be able to continuously scan for software vulnerabilities across your network. You got to prioritize the updates. You got to test those updates before you deploy them. And you can employ real-time patching for your internet-facing devices. So this is what I said, the people-facing devices, especially those that are attached to the internet, they need to be continuously patched. But don't go patching without testing the patches. So confirm successful patch application and monitor for any issues. If you do appropriate testing before you apply the patches, this should not be an issue for you. Restrict personal hardware. Do not allow people to bring their own devices to attach to the network. Now, I know this is very controversial. Many companies use this as a cost-saving measure. They say, well, gosh, I don't have to buy a laptop that the company has to own for my employees if they're willing to use their own laptop. Problem is you can't manage that laptop, and therefore you can't secure it. Not in a way that will thwart a nation-state actor anyway. Our feeling is that if you really want to get serious about this stuff, you cannot allow any bring your own devices on the network. You must segment your network. You've got to implement VLANs or get software like Illumio to isolate your network segments. If a part of the network is breached, you don't want somebody being able to walk all over the rest of the network. You want that thing to be contained. And things like Illumio or VLANs can help you do that. 802.1x authentication. Most of the products today use this. And this ensures that only authorized devices are connecting to your network. Application controls. You should deploy application control for business, what Microsoft used to call WDAC. And this it lets you create strict software execution policies. You should create an allow list, what everybody used to call a white list. And because you want to create a comprehensive list of permitted applications and scripts. That way, if anything else runs, it at least fires an alert for somebody to look at and says, okay, we saw this thing. It's not on the allow list. Is it good? Is it bad? Whatever. Does it need to be added to the allow list? Maybe so. But at least then you get a chance to take a look at it. Track all application launches and flag unauthorized attempts. And periodically audit and update the application allow list, as I said. It's important when you put any of these systems in place that you audit them and review them. We talked about malware being launched inside of memory. There are things you can do to protect yourself there. You can use products like Morphosec or Versec to deploy memory protection software on your devices. And then it's very, very difficult then for malware to be injected into the memory. Ransomware defense. There are products you can use like Halcyon, RansomSnare. These are great products. But basically, you just follow the NIST guidelines to protect, detect, respond, and recover, and you'll go a long way to thwarting ransomware. And you need to neutralize file-based threats. So file-based attacks, a lot of the attacks exploit vulnerabilities in files. And so you might consider using something like content disarming and reconstruction, so-called CDR. Two vendors here, Votero and Glasswall. If you're not familiar with this, basically what happens is, I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody sends you a Microsoft document. You get that thing and it turns out that there was some malicious code inside the Microsoft document. The system thought it was a Word doc, and so it launched the Word doc, no problem. What the CDR solution does is it grabs the document first. It knows exactly what a Microsoft document should look like. And so it actually tears the document apart and looks at all the pieces and parts. And if everything looks fine, it just puts it back together again and sends it on. If it sees malware in there, then what it does, most of them have an option. It can either just flag it and say, well, okay, end of story. Somebody needs to look at this. Or, particularly with Glasswall, what it can do is it can then pull the malware out, reconstruct the file into the Word doc, and send it on its way, all the time alerting security that this occurred. The great thing about these things is they're not just for Word docs. They can be used for PDFs, for audio files, video files, and so on. So really, really interesting software. Talked about data encryption before. You might want to consider homomorphic encryption or doing confidential computing like we talked about, where everything is in a secure enclave. The nice thing about homomorphic encryption is that you never need to decrypt your data to be able to do what you need to do. This is not going to be for all of your data. This would only be for your sensitive databases because there is a performance hit to doing this. And also homomorphic encryption, while there are vendors out there that do this, it can take some time to set up. Secure processing enables data analysis without decryption. This is what homomorphic encryption does. Now, anytime you're doing encryption, I mentioned this before, key management is very, very important. And so you have to establish robust key management processes and never, ever, ever store the keys with the data. What about web-based threats? Well, you can look at browser isolation. We see more and more larger companies doing this that have very sensitive data that they're processing, but they need access to the internet on a real-time basis. So folks like Chasm, Garrison, who just got bought by somebody, Layer X is out of Israel. That's a really good product as well. What these guys is they do is they isolate your browser, so that it's almost like a confidential compute environment. So the browser is operating in its own little enclave, and so it allows all the web browsing to happen in these isolated containers. You should block direct file downloads to endpoint devices. Now, obviously, you might have some people in your organization who need to be able to download stuff. Let's say security people, they need to be able to download patches so they can test them. Okay, I got that. But then not everybody has to have the ability to do that. And as I said before, monitor, monitor, monitor. Network segmentation, microsegmentation, we mentioned this before. What you're trying to do is restrict lateral movement. I mentioned Illumio. There's also Guardicore. You need to protect your sensitive data in your applications. And you have to, when you design this stuff, design your network, you should do it in such a way that you are isolating those things that you consider to be highly critical. And I would not put all the critical assets into one segment of the network, because if that segment happens to be the one that gets breached, well, then, you're kind of screwed. So they should be spread around. Restrict third-party access. No third party should have direct access to your systems. That's just asking for trouble, because you don't have any control over the third party. So you should implement a secure proxy, and you should implement some kind of cloud isolation. And these platforms exist so that you can have external collaboration without threats to your corporate network. And secure your supply chain. You got to do vendor due diligence. Black Kite does a great job of this. You need to be, just like you're looking at your employees and trying to figure out, okay, are they good people or bad people? You need to be looking at your third party folks as well. And if you're engaged with a third party, or you're thinking about engaging with a third party and they are reluctant to allow you to see what their internal security practices are, then my answer to that is go elsewhere. I don't need to do the business with that person bad enough to have a system in place that just introduces risk. I don't need that. So third-party risk management, highly important. Secure your privileged access. Isolate those workstations. You're going to have people on the network who have to have, maybe godlike access, maybe not quite godlike access, but they have to be able to access multiple things on the network. So domain admins, for example, they should have two different machines and 2 different logins, depending on what their job is at the time. If they're acting as a user, they would use one machine and one set of credentials, and if they're acting as the admin, they use another. And yes, you can do this through virtual machines if you want to. And if you want to really get serious about this stuff, you can make sure that your admin workstations don't have any internet access. And the way I've seen this implemented and to be practical is that you got an admin who's responsible for, say, downloading patches and testing those patches. Well, those things get downloaded on a dedicated machine. That's all the machine is used for. And it is air gap from the network. The patches are then written off to a physical device, such as a USB stick, something like that. Remember, this is all internal. And then introduced to perhaps a network device that's hooked to a test network so that you can test the patch. So a lot of people say, well, I can't do air gap because it's just, too much problems. Yeah, it does introduce more steps. But again, like I said, if you are really serious about trying to go after these nation state actors, this is one of the things that you really need to be able to do. Now let's talk a little bit about remote administration. Don't allow it, period. This, a lot of the administrators love this because they can, administer their network from anywhere in the world they happen to be. But that just brings in all kinds of risk. And so if you're going to be serious about thwarting nation state actors, you cannot allow this at all. Everything has to be done on site and preferably through dedicated machines. Continuous monitoring, we've mentioned before. So vulnerability scanning, penetration testing is very important. You've put in, place all these things. Well, let's test them. Let's see if they're really working. So bring in a third-party penetration tester. And oh, by the way, don't use the same one year after year after year if you happen to be an organization that wants to do annual penetration testing. My recommendation is that you find 3 that you like and that you rotate them. Security event monitoring, very, very important. Now, there's some great AI tools coming on the market that can help you do this, so you don't have to go hire an army of people. Incident response testing. People have heard about tabletop exercises. These things are important, especially in large organizations. You need to practice. What happens if there is a breach? Does our incident response plan actually work? So you don't want to find that out in the case of a real breach and then find out, oh gosh, we had flaws in our plan. So all in all, a comprehensive defense. And if you follow a security framework, you've got a decent insider threat program, and you ruthlessly implement security controls, you can go a long way towards thwarting most nation state attacks. Now, I will tell you, nation states are persistent, and like I said before, they have unlimited resources. So if they want to get in, they eventually will get in if you don't detect them and do something about it. And so that's really what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to detect these attacks so that we can then put up additional defenses to thwart them. And with that, I just want to say thanks. I really appreciate being here, and I hope everybody has a great day.